Men, in these videos, what we're trying to do is set you up to fight against sin. And one of the key ways that we fight against sin is detecting lies. What happens with temptation is it always comes first with some kind of propaganda. It comes with deception. Because when the mind is deceived, when it's not thinking correctly, what that does is it opens up the heart. And so then all of a sudden a sinful passion can come and can affect our decisions. Now what this means is it's really important that if we're going to fight sin, that we're constantly vigilant and we're looking out for the lies that Satan uses to position ourselves in a place of weakness. And one of the key lies, a lie that every man needs to know, needs to understand, and needs to look out for, is the lie that there's no hook in the bait of temptation. Now, I don't know if you're a fisherman. You might love fishing, you might hate fishing, it doesn't really matter. We all understand enough about fishing to realize that what you do is you take a hook. And that hook's got one objective. It's to hook a fish and pull it a direction it doesn't want to go, namely to pull it back to the fisherman. But we don't just throw the hook out there. What we do is we take some bait, whether it's fresh bait or some kind of artificial lure, and we cover that hook, and then we throw that into the water, and that fish that's just thinking about something to eat, the pleasure of being satisfied, grabs hold of the bait, but it gets hooked, and it gets pulled a direction it doesn't want to go. And guys, that's about as powerful of a picture of what sin does as I could possibly think to give you. Because the truth is, there is not a single sin, there's not a single temptation that doesn't come with a hook. And it's so important that in that moment where we feel ourselves wanting the pleasure, the promise of sin, we've got to look long enough and see that actually, no, there's a hook. I want to reject this because even if it gives me temporary pleasure, I don't want the long-standing consequences of what this sin is in fact going to do to me. Now let's try to make it a little bit more specific. What is it exactly that is the hook in sin, so to speak? Because when sin comes, whether it's a sin of lust, whether it's a sin of anger or of greed, again, what's promised is momentary pleasure. Think about you're fighting with your wife, you're angry, you're wanting to say this thing that you know is going to hurt her. And in that moment, as horrifying as it sounds to say in public, that's what sounds like it's pleasurable. If I can crush this person in my anger, that's going to give me some instant satisfaction. That's the promise of sin, momentary pleasure. Now, then what's the hook that so often goes unseen, at least when we indulge those passions? Well, the hook, first of all, is pain. Sin produces pain, maybe not in the immediate instance of indulging, but it does later on. And so it's so important. So go back to that example of you're fighting with your wife, you're angry, you're wanting to say something that you know is going to hurt her. What's important is to be able to recognize that actually in that bait there's a hook, that if you let this passion direct your behavior, you might crush her. And guess what? When you come back to your senses, that's going to be a terrible place to be in. To realize the pain that you have brought to her, the cruelty with which you've treated her. How many times have we come out of an argument, all of a sudden seeing the debris around us, and what felt satisfying for a moment, you feel guilty and ashamed of what you've just said or what you have just done. And guys, that's not just true for anger, it's true for lust, it's true for greed, it's true for all of the sins. Whatever pleasure we get at first, we wake up the next day and think, you know what, I'm dissatisfied, I'm empty, I'm hollow, look at what I've just done. And it creates pain, it doesn't create pleasure. But it's not just pain. If you're thinking about that hook, it's important to also realize that that hook is the consequences of our behavior. So again, you think of the person who indulges lust. He's married, he sees somebody else. How fun would it be to have a short-term affair? Nobody will find out about this. There's no consequences. I'll do this in secret. But then what happens? It comes out. And all of a sudden, his kids hate him, his wife, their marriage is on the rocks. This person isn't even a part of his life anymore. There were consequences to this behavior that he didn't see when he was just looking at that single act that at the moment sounded kind of exhilarating and fun. It's so important to see not just the pain, but see the consequences and to ask ourselves, do we want those consequences in our life? But guys, there's more. There's the loss of freedom that comes with sin. Part of the lie of sin is that, I can indulge the attitude or the passion, but I have that same freedom to choose differently in the future. And honestly, that's just not the way character works. Character works by habit. And so let's take greed. I'm just going to, put relationships aside, and I'm going to give myself to my career so I can make lots of money. But later on, I'm going to use that money and I'm going to love people and be generous. Guys, that's not the way it works. If you indulge greed, you become a greedy person. You lose your freedom to be generous. And so over time, it just becomes your hardened character, and you start to prioritize money over people, and then you're just increasingly willing to crush people for the sake of money. And so guys, what I want you to see is it's really important, those moments where the battle feels fierce, when you really feel yourself attracted to some form of temptation, one of the things to do is to ask yourself, where's the hook? I can see the bait. I can't see the hook. Pause for a moment. Reflect on the pain, the consequences, the loss of freedom. And then you ask yourself, do you want to take the bait or not? And guys, if you're thinking rationally, if you're thinking soberly, I think you'll recognize that actually it's not worth it. And so guys, be vigilant. Detect these lies. Let's resist temptation, and let's fight against sin.